Yeah, I'm
All right,
ready.
we're
I'm
live.
always, I'm
Hopefully
always
on
ready.
YouTube and Facebook and Discord.
Excellent. So good evening, everybody. For those of you who are joining us for the first time or haven't joined us for a while, my name's Josh. Um, we got Dan, Alex, and Dave with us this evening. Um, we'll go over a couple of cool news articles, stuff that's happening in the community and to the community. And then we'll see if we got some updates on uh, some regulation and whatnot that's going on. I know the big topic right now among in the industry is going to be remote ID, as that's going live for manufacturers next month. So on the 22nd, if I'm not mistaken,
16,
September 20. Oh,
16.
September 16th. I'm sorry. So that's definitely going to be a big topic. And on that topic, let me fully unprepared here. I thought I was ready. All right. So on that topic, the ASTM standard has unofficially been put up on the Federal Register. It goes live tomorrow, and it goes through. It's their acceptance of a means of compliance for remote ID. So this is a standard that companies can use to create remote ID, and as long as it's made to this standard and performs to this standard, it's going to be better accepted from the FAA or have a better chance of it being accepted. Now, that's assuming that the device performs as expected and the declaration of compliance is complete, all the other different things. One of the differences that the acceptance has over the ASTM standard, and Dave, you'll have to help me with this just to make sure the FAA did amend this for hardening in terms of tamper resistance, both physically and digitally, of the both the components and the information that the broadcast module slash remote ID would need
So,
to standard remote ID.
in short, it takes it. The ASTM group created a standard, submitted it to the FAA for approval. The FAA said, "Yeah, your standard's pretty good, and we'll approve it, but here's some additional steps you have to take before it's actually
Right.
really approved."
Right.
And then Dave can maybe
And
explain what the differences are.
Absolutely. And happy to say that I'm a member of the ASTM and I'm on this working group for remote ID and have been working actively for the last 3 years on this. So this is an amazing piece of work. There are over 130 people on distribution. It is absolutely who's who in manned aviation or crewed aviation, as well as unmanned, as well as telecom. And so the level of expertise that we tapped into was amazing. The additions are the remote identification system shall protect the Part 89 required broadcast message from being altered or disabled by any person. The remote identification system shall incorporate techniques or methods that reduce the ability of any person to physically or functionally modify or disable any aspect or component of the remote identification system that could impact compliance with a remote identification rule. Yada, 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 whether make specified, let's see, provides major, okay, yeah. In applying section 7.5.2 of ASTM F3586-22, the applicant shall determine whether the masking of the specified items from user input adequately provides the functional tamper resistance protection specified by the means of compliance, and if it does not, shall incorporate additional functional tamper resistant techniques or methods in accordance with the means of compliance. So this is pretty disturbing to us in the ASTM. We had two full-time, or we had two full-timers, two people on the from the FAA sit in on all of our weekly meetings for 3+ years on this work. Had multiple iterations with the FAA on this, and as it says back in the introduction of this document, this the ASTM submitted a final of this on May 13th, so it took till tomorrow for the FAA to approve something that they have been working on with us for 3 years. So, and to make these vague 3 points. So we'll be meeting tomorrow. We'll figure out what the appropriate response is. To me, as a someone from global tech, this is really difficult to understand what it is that they mean. We spent hours and hours with the FAA and among the working group of the ASTM talking about, well, what does tamper resistance really mean? And it's not tamper proof. It's tamper resistant. So we created a number of ideas that we felt reasonable and within the spirit of the guideline. I guess that didn't fly. Forgive the pun, with the FAA at the last minute, but the thousands and thousands and thousands of person hours that have gone into this document give some implication of the level of difficulty of creating your own means of compliance and getting FAA approval. From here, if anyone wants to create a broadcast module or a standard remote ID UAS, they would then need to pull down the forms for a declaration of compliance, point to this means of compliance, do the appropriate testing, fill out the forms, and submit it to the FAA for approval. That is not a trivial endeavor in itself. So we're well aware that there are manufacturers that have been using the ASTM standard. They were members of the working group, and they are using it to write their own declaration of compliance. So we anticipate that there certainly will be more than one company that will be able to meet the September 16, 2022 deadline for manufacturers.
So does this ASTM standard cover both the standard remote ID and modules, or do you have to extrapolate from one to the other?
Great question. Yeah, it's explicit. There are sections that describe, here's the standard, here's a broadcast module. And because of the differences in the requirements from both the ground control station vertical accuracy requirement as well as emergency status, and there are a couple of other minor ones. A big one, of course, is the standard remote ID UAS. The entire aircraft has to go through a subpart F production requirement certification.
And I would guess
that's a big deal.
It doesn't quite cover things like how a manufacturer would have a firmware update to make their drone compliant, but they could use this standard to create their own and make it easier for themselves to get approval from the FAA.
Absolutely. And so the message element, for example, is spelled out in great detail. The what to use and what's recommended to use in terms of Wi-Fi, which Bluetooth to use, what technologies, what sort of antenna radiation patterns, acceptance of that if we use components that are FCC approved already, that's an acceptable use. So there are a lot of demonstration of technology that has already been approved either by the FAA or the FCC that the FAA approves as a demonstration of compliance with the rule. That saves a ton of time when you're developing a product.
Yeah, that's one thing I found very interesting about this remote ID. Like the final rule says that it could be anything that's compatible with like a mobile phone. So it could be Wi-Fi, it could be Bluetooth, but they don't specify the technology. And then this ASTM standard probably sort of picks the technology and says this is how we're going to implement it. But somebody else could get a different means of compliance authorized by the FAA that uses a completely different technology. So that makes me think strange things. Like, so if you've got an app on your phone that could work and detect remote ID devices, you could theoretically have a dozen different apps that only detect each different kind of remote ID. But I'm guessing the FAA would whittle that down and say, okay, no, we're only going to authorize the ones that follow the same sort of standard. So you could have one app that worked for all of them.
So this is a good example. So it looked like we were going to recommend in the standard Bluetooth 4. Awesome. Every phone on the, every newish phone on the planet has Bluetooth 4. Great. Sounds awesome. Oh, it doesn't incorporate the testing standard, so we'd have to write additional testing for the Bluetooth for the person submitting the declaration of compliance. So the group agreed we should go with Bluetooth 5, and so that means that it will be able a lot of it will be able to be backward compatible, but for the programming and the work that needs to be done, the standard specifies Bluetooth 5. So it's things like that that took hours and hours and hours of discussion that were, just the level of detail and the diligence was just an amazing feat to watch and to be part of.
Now, I don't know what I was expecting when I read the actual FAA document, but it's pretty light on details. Does that mean you have to get the actual standard from the ASTM, and is that something people have to pay for?
Yeah, yes and yes. And so if you're not a member of the ASTM in some capacity or fashion, the documents are available. The FAA memo describes with the website where the the ASTM standard can be purchased. ASTM is a private organization. It is an international standards development body, and they raise money by selling the intellectual capital. It's so I believe it's about $125 for a standard like this, $125 US, I should say.
In the chat, Meat's
Um,
saying it was $60 when he last looked.
okay.
Maybe it's different for
Yeah,
this
a
standard.
link to the actual standard.
One of them is 60 and the other one was 85 for
Okay, there's two
versions.
There are two. There is a 20. There is the first, which is was issued in October 2019, and the second standard, which the combination of these two comprise the means of compliance, which was approved by the FAA. So you have to have two, and there is no way that you could write a declaration of compliance without having the means of compliance document right in front of you. No, there's just not a chance. So yeah, great question, Stan. I appreciate it.
And I assume the ASTM group would be very unhappy if somebody bought that and it just made it public.
Yeah, that's a copyright infringement. I mean, that's
Sure.
yeah. I mean that stuff happens, but yeah.
So real quick, so the means of compliance, that is the document that is basically the roadmap for how to accomplish remote ID to that standard, correct? And then
Correct.
the declaration of compliance, that's going to be on an individual level. Company A's declaration of compliance could be different from companies B, and that's basically a document saying this is the device we developed, this is us declaring that it's compliant with the means of compliance from the ASTM standard, correct?
Correct. And the declaration of compliance must specify a specific means of compliance. I use this means of compliance for my testing. Here are the results of my testing that prove why I'm certifying this as acceptable.
Right. So the ASTM standards body that created this is a 3.5 year project amongst how many people? About 150-ish people.
Easy. Yeah.
And so for a separate organization to create their own means of compliance is not a small matter. So the amount of people I imagine who will be referencing the ASTM standard would be relatively high. And it's ASTM is a pretty prolific standards body. If you look at electronics laying around your house, you'll see an ASTM logo on at least one of them, if not several. So they develop standards that are definitely worldwide approved and utilized. So this was a great undertaking, and I imagine now that the standard or the means of compliance is being published, I'm curious to see if we see an uptick in submissions So in terms of organizations who are submitting for their standard remote ID. So organizations like DJI or Skydio, who are going to be selling drones in the United States. Anybody who sells a drone for use in the United States after September 16th must comply with standard remote ID, correct?
Thought it was manufacture, not sell.
Manufacturer.
Yeah, I think
it's a manufacturing date.
they use the word produce. So anybody who produces, like creates, builds, manufactures, whatever.
For use in the United States.
And this is distinctly different from a kit or a home built.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a definite, distinct definition in the final rule. So, and then actual users, end users, are required to be compliant with a remote ID starting next September. So that's about when we'll probably see some different drops for different types of remote ID. So it'll be interesting to see. All that will be public information as people get their standards approved. And for standard remote ID, the approval process is much, much different, correct? They have to get type certified or not type certified, but they have to get, each individual model needs to get certified. So
right, we're hoping it's not a full type certification, but a subpart F approval. So manufacturing production requirements satisfied.
So definitely something to watch going forward. And I'm excited to see who rolls out with what. So yeah, this could be interesting to see who's going to be producing drones for use in the United States. And here's the other thing, is that now that we've are starting to roll this out, this is going to start to roll out, I imagine, in different forms. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and I know Alex is going to keep an eye on the Federal Register for us. If there are any more means of compliances that pop up, or any declaration of compliances that start popping up, he'll let us know, and we'll make sure everybody gets to hear about it.
Yeah, that's just as long as the Federal Register does its automatic forwarding notification, because I don't check the website.
Sure. Yep.
Ever. It's only with
you've got really good filters set up.
Yeah, you do.
I don't know what I did to get them that good, but
hey, you know what? Just keep doing what you're doing.
I haven't touched them. Yeah, I don't plan on it.
That's funny.
So, but yeah,
all right.
I get it. Stuff.
So, going forward, and Dave, I think you did send out this document that we've been working on to a couple different people, but we're working on clarifications on some remote ID situations. So definitely, stay tuned for some of that information. We've got some of that stuff rolling out. But in the meantime, this is something that popped up last year. This is a volcano that erupted in Iceland, and this was in March of last year. Some of this footage we've shown on our show before, but I just thought this was the coolest thing. This is some unreleased footage.
Oh yeah, I saw a really short clip of this too. It's pretty cool. Just like, I hope they've got a good zoom on their camera. Otherwise, I'd be panicking. Like, start lifting off soon.
So I do remember when he was doing these shots originally, that he either lost one of the drones or it came back severely damaged just from the heat. Because I imagine the heat on this is incredible, but super cool to watch this, this lava bubbling up from, underneath the ground and starting to spill over. So, he's going to start, as part of the anniversary, he's going to start releasing some footage that wasn't shown last year. So I'm definitely going to be keeping a lookout. I follow him on Twitter just because some of the stuff is so cool. And his name's Bjorn Steinbeck. He goes by @bsteinbeck on Twitter. So I'm going to be keeping a watch out for that because, I mean, just amazing use of a drone. I mean, just the footage alone, I can imagine has been, you know, a boon for the scientific community. And while, you know, we've been studying volcanoes for, you know, eons, this is just, you know, never before seen kind of stuff. So pretty cool. All right. So nothing's ever complete unless we have a DJI leak. So this seems to be par for the course. And so the new DJI Avata, this is their Cine Whoop drone. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but what I do want to kind of spend time on is the new Goggle 2s that are being kind of leaked as well. So we don't know if the goggles are going to be compliant with any of the existing current air units or the CADX units or the DJI FPV or anything like that. So, but the new goggles are significantly smaller, have less antennas, at least the leaked footage of them.
Well, the leak talks about 2 external antennas that are removable, like that you see there folding up, and 2 built-in
Yep.
antennas.
So, definitely interesting.
And also, can DJI, like, they are the worst at naming products ever.
Yeah,
the DJI
they
FPV
really are.
drone versus the DJI FPV system, and then they've got DJI FPV goggles. Then they have FPV goggles V2, and then
Right,
now the
these are
new
V2
goggles
which
are
really
V2.
the third version.
Which really aren't the third version because they've got the original goggles and then the goggles RE. I don't know. Their
Yeah.
English version of their
horrible.
names are the worst.
Yeah, they're ridiculous. So their naming convention. Somebody's making some money from that, but I don't know if they should.
Somebody's gonna have to write a paper on it.
So, but definitely interesting. We'll have to wait and see if they're going to be compliant. My guess, I mean, oops, my hard guess is no. To be honest with you, just because DJI seems to do everything that they can to force you to buy new stuff.
Yeah, I'm gonna wait and see. But the last rumors I heard, there's a lot of cross compatibility between the new stuff, which I hope is true.
Yeah, so we'll see. I'm not gonna hold my breath for it, but if you're still into the DJI digital, which is a
Analog.
great system, what's that?
Somebody whispered analog.
Yeah. Hey, I love analog. I definitely do, but I do like the crispness of digital. And I've been able to fly the DJI. I have a set of DJIs, and I've been able to fly Dave's HD Zeros, which were really good too. So digital in any form is definitely a great way to go if you want that fidelity. All right, so this one kind of piqued my interest. This is from Popular Science. Why controlling a drone with lasers has its perks and pitfalls. So, the UK, a British defense firm called Kinetic, spelled with a Q on both sides, has announced the successful control of a drone by laser. Okay, so first off, I'm gonna say drone control by laser. We've always done a lot of this stuff with radio frequency. Doing it with lasers, well, in my mind, is probably not the best. It is possible, but to me, it seems easily defeatable. And I mean, one of the first things you need to do to defeat lasers is just block the signal physically.
Mirror.
Like that's all you need to do. What's that?
Mirror.
A mirror, or even think of it from this
bird.
perspective. How about just chaff? I mean, you put a bunch of tinfoil in the air, and I mean, you're going to disrupt that signal. So, in the meantime, and I'm not wearing a tinfoil hat. I'm just saying, tinfoil would work.
But on the other hand, your signals aren't going all over the place, and other people can't receive
Correct.
them.
And that's the point. So that's the point that they're making is that laser control, and we'll get to it here in a second, is essentially nobody's going to know because it's a direct link from the sender to the receiver. It's uninterceptable, but it is susceptible to disruption. So
So what
um,
if you so what
go
if you
ahead.
had a hybrid version of it where it was mostly autonomous, but you just sent a couple of waypoints at a time with the lasers? You give
You
it a
could.
couple of commands ahead, it does that, and it doesn't need to be constantly receiving the current
Correct.
um,
Packets.
input.
So the good thing with this is if you're let's say you're using this, obviously this is a defense firm, so military use. If your opponent doesn't know that you're using it, it's great. If they do know you're using it, then it's possible to, in terms, intercept the signal or break the signal. So, and that's kind of the points that they make here. So the demonstration took place earlier this year at the Salisbury Plain training ground in southern England near Stonehenge. The drone was controlled by a system called free space optical communication, in which information is turned into light transmitted through the open sky and picked up by a dedicated receiver. FSOC provides very high bandwidth, very low probability of detection, communications, low logistical footprint, and the potential to negate the considerable investment that adversaries may have made in denying the RF spectrum. As we all know, essentially subverting the RF spectrum is fairly easy to do. The demonstration took place in March of 2022 as part of a broader push by the United Kingdom's Defense Science and Technology Laboratory effort to make drone communications more resilient. Um, let's see. The promise of this approach, though, is for the possibility of clear, high bandwidth transmission of vast quantities of data rapidly with light and done openly wherever the sender and receiver be. Um, they go on to talk about fiber optic cable, which is great for things like high speed internet and long form transmission of data. Making this kind of communication work has been the subject of military research for decades. DARPA collaborated on the optical and radio frequency combined link experiment. This program aimed to combine the high data capacity of light communications with signal fidelity of radio. Sorry. So radio signals are sent over known frequencies, understood and monitored for over a century. The nature of radio transmission means the waves can be observed beyond where they are received, as the signals travel through open air and sometimes refract or diffuse across terrain and atmospheric phenomena. And obviously, this is the basis for remote ID, is sending things over RF. This is the way we control our quads and model airplanes. This is how we transmit video signals. So, um, but as we all know, other people can see those and possibly create essentially hacks into it or spoofs of it. So, the promise of optical communication, specifically based on lasers, is that it will instead concentrate all its transmitted information in a narrow beam of light. Free space optical communication is almost impossible to intercept or detect, as the laser beam travels directly from one platform over a very narrow path. Kinetic describes on its website. Interception would require an adversary to be physically present in the path of the beam, something that is extremely difficult to achieve. If interception is difficult, maintaining a signal is likely not easy. While the drone would have the advantage of knowing where the directed beam is coming from and automatically orienting its receiver to that point, it could become vulnerable to laser dazzlers designed to disable the sensors.
Laser dazzlers.
AKA chaff. So,
Disco balls.
yeah, exactly, right? So, definitely interesting. I see its capability. I also see its downfalls. But Alex may be on to a point. Is if you have an autonomous drone sending brief signal bursts, that kind of thing, might be a viable solution to it. But again, works great if nobody knows you're doing it. Possibly a problem.
Well, now we know the UK's doing it.
Yeah, definitely. See, this is the part I don't get. It used to be back in the day, and then side tangent for everybody. On my soapbox, used to be back in the day that nobody knew what everybody else's military was doing. They were used to be like state secrets, and now all of a sudden it's like, hey, this is what we're doing.
Well,
It's
it's presentation of power.
yeah,
It's
well,
a deterrent.
drone lasers are not a deterrent, but definitely
Eh,
interesting. So this comes out of Mexico. I'm only gonna do the top part of this article, the bottom part. I'll link it, but it gets a little political with the Mexican government. I'm not about calling anybody out, but um, Mexico will attempt to send an aquatic drone, and I know we're all flying guys here, but aquatic drones are pretty cool too. Similar technology. Sent an aquatic drone into a collapsed coal mine where 10 miners have been trapped since last week. Laura Velasquez from the National Civil Defense Coordinator said Monday that images from the drone could help authorities decide whether to send in divers without putting them at risk. She also said that 25 pumps were working to remove water from the flooded shafts. Water that was once 111 feet deep was now between 55 and 78 feet. The mine in Sabinas, Coahuila, I hope I said that right, about 70 miles southwest of Eagle Pass in Texas, collapsed last Wednesday with 15 miners inside. 5 managed to escape with injuries. Authorities say the miners breached a neighboring space filled with water, and there currently has been no contact with the remaining 10. So hopefully that technology is able to get in there, figure out if there's a safe way to get in and get those miners out. Hopefully they're okay. Um, but definitely another use of technology for good that I can appreciate. All right, this comes from Alex. This is really cool. This is the First Energy Corp, and it seems I did. We don't have these guys here in Arizona, but it seems like they do cover a lot of different areas in terms of power. But one of the cool things with them is if your drone gets caught in the power lines or crashes into a utility pole or substation, all you have to do is call them and they will retrieve your drone for you. Obviously, it's a big safety thing. Never trying to mess with power lines or substations or anything like that. That kind of stuff will kill people if you don't know what you're doing. So definitely best to let the professionals do that. They even go into um, showcase a drone app. It looks like it's a phone drone app, and uh First Energy. It looks like it may be something they developed, which is kind of cool. Alex, did you
I
look into
haven't
that?
I haven't looked into the app yet. I haven't downloaded it to try it, but all I did was I saw an ad on YouTube. It was like, what
It's pretty
if you
cool.
say like because the ad on YouTube was it caught me off guard.
Right.
I wasn't expecting one for oh it was like and it was in a positive note too. It wasn't
Yeah.
a don't
I,
fly your drone kind of thing, not super negative. It was like we understand accidents happen. Let's be
yeah.
safe about this, which
Exactly.
was a I liked the approach and it just caught me off guard.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really cool.
And the other cool thing is they have this little section underneath that says, "So now you got your first drone. Now what?" Um, so they have links to the FAA getting started site for UAS, how to become a licensed pilot, how to register, and a few little safety rules. Keep your drone at least 200 feet away from power lines. Obviously, that's not an official FAA rule. It's just I mean, I would say it's
Guideline.
Unless you
yeah,
want to get
it's
some really
something.
good diving videos, then stay 200
Yeah,
feet away.
yeah. I mean, don't fly your drone in the dark or bad weather. I mean, could be for some people, yes. Other people, we can still fly at
Or you
night,
see that, oh, hey, I didn't think about flying in dark or bad weather. I should give that a shot.
Or you could be Dan and just conformal code everything and fly in everything. Uh, Nothing stops him. And then always keep your drone at or below 400 feet and where you can see it. So, I mean, this is good. This is a great way for somebody who generally has zero to do with drones to throw on there. The information they provide is great. It's not a beat you over the head kind of thing.
Mhm.
It's just informational. And they're doing a good service. I mean, they're
Yeah.
protecting people, they're protecting their equipment, and they're protecting their customers. And definitely obviously willing to help. So
Yeah, I
this is
wonder how
great.
many
So
how many people have called when their drones have gotten stuck in power lines. Like enough to put that on their website.
Yeah.
right? I mean, they
And
do cover a
part
lot of area. So like we got Toledo, Ohio, um, the illuminating company, Pin Power. So I mean,
Potomac.
yeah, Potomac, West Penn. Um, so there's a lot of different areas that they service. I imagine most of this is on the east side of the country.
Yes.
But this is definitely really cool. So
Part of me wants
uh
to try calling the number, but I also don't have a use for calling the number.
we'll just call them and say thank you. I mean, that's a definite good thing. So
Will they get it out of
um
a tree for you? That would be
it's
quite the
probably
service.
gonna be power line.
Well, if
Yeah,
it's on their property and it's
yeah,
in
I
a
would imagine.
tree,
Maybe.
then
So definitely cool. So that's all I've got for this evening. I just thought some of this stuff was pretty neat. Dave, what do you got for us?
Just that we have produced, along with Pilot Institute, so, Flight Test Community Association, and Drone Service Providers Alliance Organization, a couple of pages that describe an update on remote ID. We have learned that we should go back to basics and also try to do a little bit of rudimentary education for folks who are new to the hobby or forgot the details of the rule. And we've also dug in and done a fair amount of detail work. And thanks to Dan for rereading the entire document once again. And I think we've all done that a couple times recently. But that's that, and we'll let you know what the decision is on what actions we think we should be taking out of the ASTM. The working group is getting together tomorrow to discuss the additions that we talked about earlier to the MOC. And working on the drone safety team, that work continues on the UAS ASRS, because I don't speak in full words, only abbreviations. The the UAS aviation safety reporting system and how it pertains to drones. That's working, and we're also wrapping up the AC TG13, the Aviation Advanced Aviation Advisory Committee Tasking Group 13, which is a comeback on a white paper written by the FAA. So that's happening as well. So busy, but good work.
And to build a little on what Dave was saying, that document that we were all working on for remote ID related stuff was heavily featured in Joshua Bardwell and It's Blunty's news stream yesterday. They even put part of it on the show while they were talking about it and talked about Dave and the FPV Freedom Coalition. And this is our breakdown of all those things. And they did a really great job going over some of the details.
And that there was a lot of work put in by a lot of different people on that
Mm-hmm.
document. I know each one of us, Dave created the document, and each one of us went in there and did edits and clarifications, and we argued back and forth a little bit, and as well as Greg and from Pilot Institute helped.
Vic
Vic
and
Moss,
Lee from
Kenji,
Vic
Flight
Moss,
Test.
Kenji
Lee
Sugahara,
from Flight Test.
Lee
So
Archer, and Josh
there's a
Fritzler.
lot
Yep.
of there was a lot of community involvement within that document. So we're hoping once fully complete and released and videos are done and whatnot, it provides a lot of information. And one of the things I feel like uh, is massively my fault, and some of the things that Dan and I went back and forth on, was the difference between bind and fly and almost ready to fly and remote ID. So we've all been saying that bind and fly should be good to go, pre-builds and that kind of stuff. And that terminology is not factually correct. So bind and fly would be a complete system that comes with a receiver, comes with a remote, or could just come with the receiver that works with the remote that you have. That kind of system would actually be required to, if it was a complete kit with a bind and fly system, would have to comply with standard remote ID. So if you are a manufacturer um, who sells pre-mades, pre-builds, that kind of thing, the term clarification is almost ready to fly. So you want to have something that is incomplete in some form or fashion. And one of the things we've always espoused is that limiting it, like taking the receiver out and letting the person choose, is a way to provide an almost ready to fly that will be compatible with broadcast module, and will not have to go through the rigmarole of all the stuff that standard remote ID entails, which includes compatibility with your transmitter, and remote ID included in that transmitter, as well as the drone itself. So I just wanted to clarify that because that was a big topic that we discussed and went back and forth on. And I can't remember what we've called it all this time, but I feel like bind and fly is what we've been calling it. So I just wanted to clear that up. So almost ready to fly, missing major components, final assembly done by the end user, is all a requirement to fall under the home built um, exception, essentially, and be able to use for broadcast module and not have to comply with standard.
And this, of course, is a very important point for the retailers in the community. So we've reached out to the retailers that we know, which is most of them, most of the large ones certainly, and shared the document we wrote. And we're open to questions. And Josh and I will be on a couple of live streams, and so we will work to get this out and make sure that we've got the correct information and refute some disinformation that's getting around. So we're happy to do this, and I think it's a nice piece of work. And how Pilot Institute, FTCA, FPVFC jumped in, and DSPA, all these folks that we all know and appreciate so much. They all jumped in over a weekend, and then Monday we had this done very quickly. So great piece of work, and my thanks.
And so the way I've been thinking about it, and want to explain it to people, is that the first bit of remote ID jumps into effect September 16th, I think it was. Anyway, the middle of this September this year.
Mm-hmm.
And that part says that anybody producing a drone for use in the United States must comply with standard remote ID. So you have to build a drone that has GPS in the radio and tracks you and does all these really difficult things, unless and then there's two exceptions. One exception to that is you're building the drone for your own personal recreation, or you're doing it for education. I suppose you're building it for a class or a STEM class or something. And then the other exception is if the drone is under 250 grams, it can be produced without remote ID requirements. But then the other half of the remote ID stuff comes in a year later. That's for the operating requirements. So right now it's just the production requirements that we're really talking about.
Right. And of course, this is the way the FAA likes to write rules, right? We all fly under Part 107 if we're flying recreationally. Oh, it happens to be the exception for recreational flight,
Right.
which is under Part 107.
It gets so hard to read and follow those things. Yeah. And that ties into that these rules are somewhat vague on purpose, and it's up to the interpretation of the FAA or the person, looking at your flight saying, oh, this does or does not comply with the regulation. And that's why we really want to push the FAA to release some advisory circulars that give much better clarification to all of their employees saying, this is what we really meant by this rule.
Right. So, and that would come down to, even simple things that we've been going back and forth about is, the final rule itself does not mention spotters as being okay for
Yeah,
FPV flight.
it really
And
looks
so
very
that's something-
clear to me when you read it. It says the person holding the controls, flying the remote or the
Right.
drone has to be able to see the drone. So as
Right.
soon as you put on FPV goggles, and we've all been told by the FAA, yeah, if you put on goggles, you can't see the drone anymore. Now you're not compatible with remote ID. But we also
Right,
know the
whereas-
FAA is
Where-
saying that's not really what our intent was. So
Yeah, and
Right.
in section
And-
349 in the reauthorization, it completely negates that and for the use of visual observers. So
Right,
you know,
right, and we had this, what we're referring to is section 89.115 A and B, and we had this conversation with the executive director of the UAS Integration Office on January 21, 2021. And
so a year and a half ago.
yeah, a year and a half ago. And so we were worried then, and Dan and Josh are absolutely right. This is not the intent of the FAA. They have assured us that that FPV is okay. We have a visual observer. It's okay for 107 as well as recreational use. And as Dan was saying, an advisory circular would be really helpful around this
I
point.
could certainly
Yes.
see an example. You're flying around your neighborhood, your yard, whatever. You've got a nosy neighbor who doesn't like what you're doing. They pull in an FAA friend of theirs and they say, "Oh yeah, look at this rule. It says that you have to be able to see your drone at all times, and this person's got goggles on. They can't see their drone at all times." Well, let's give them a fine, even if that
And let's assume they have a VO, a visual observer, right?
sure.
Even with
Yep.
VO, right?
So if somebody wants to
So-
interpret the rule very literally, they could get somebody else in trouble for it. So that's why we really want the FAA to clarify that in writing.
exactly.
Right.
So, and there's a number of different topics that we'll be asking for advisory circulars on. But definite shout out to everybody who was involved with putting that together. I know I was sitting in my truck at lunch one day at work, pounding out some notes and trying to take care of some of this to assist. So, and it's funny too because just amongst the people who are working on this, there's different interpretations.
Mhm.
So Dan's interpretation is different from mine. It's in some circumstances. For me, it's like, oh well, we're calling back to the the visual observer, whereas he's seeing it literally. So if our interpretations, and we do this stuff on a daily, are different, then somebody else's could be too. So definite work on clarification there. So anyway, Alex, you got anything for us this evening, sir?
Nope, not that I can think of.
You placed second in a recent race. That's noteworthy.
Yeah,
Congratulations. I know, didn't want to toot your own horn, but good job for you for
Yeah, but,
another podium finish.
We're
Alright.
glad Alex is doing those races because he brings that racer perspective that the other three of
Yeah.
us don't have.
Yeah. For sure. Dan,
Still
anything
looking-
else from you?
Looking for that ultra senior class category, Alex. When
I don't need that.
no, for me, this is the 60,
No, but
65 and
That's
above.
not needed.
That's
It's
funny.
not physical limitations necessarily.
Everything
Maybe
slows down
reaction
as you get
time
older.
a little bit, but
I can't
I've
see, I
seen some
can't hear.
older folks
That's
racing.
good. That's good.
Careful, Alex.
But are they
careful.
competitive?
It depends at what age you consider older folks.
Oh no.
I think this is exactly why Dave wants the over 65 category.
Right.
Well, they have over 40 and over 50 at IO.
Oh, there
There's
you go.
over
It's a
40 and over
start.
50 at IO race.
Oh,
So-
goodness.
You should come there, Dave.
Excellent. I'm excited.
Dan, you got anything for us?
I'm a racer.
I was just going to say that we should talk a little bit more about the Race Day Quads lawsuit. You touched on it at the very beginning, but we didn't really bring it up or mention too much about that.
So yeah,
Like bring people up to speed. What is it? Why were we concerned about it? What happened?
yeah. So I mean, a couple different things. So race day quads, if you don't know, most everybody in the industry or who participates in the hobby, I'm sure does know. But at any rate, Race Day Quads filed a lawsuit against the FAA pertaining to remote ID from several different avenues, and a couple different things. I think there was a Fourth Amendment concern. There were issues brought up with FRIAs. There was issues brought up with the way the rule was created, that kind of thing. And this has been ongoing for a year and a half, I think. I know Tyler announced this at the protest that he would take this route. Um, and he did. And the judge responded back to the um, merits of the case and basically flat out denied them all, and shot RDQ down, pardon the pun. And you know, we there were some concerning things. I think one of the things that I was particularly concerned about is that it could have um, resulted in one form or fashion as taking preemption away from the FAA, which basically means that every state, every city, every county, um, every town could create different rules and essentially create a patchwork of rules. And there were some challenges from RDQ that could have brought that to light, which would make things extremely difficult for everybody. If I were to travel like Dave and I did, we went to Ohio, the rules could be different than they are in Arizona or New York. And if you don't know what those rules are, you could inadvertently violate something and get yourself into trouble. If I stepped into the next city over, and for those of you who don't know, the Phoenix area is a mesh of 10 to 12 different cities all in one area. If I stepped over to the next city, which literally is 2 miles from my house, the rules could be different. So it makes things very challenging, not only for hobbyists, but even more so for people doing commercial work. It could create a lot of chaos. So that was definitely a concern.
And there were some
Um,
hints about that during the, what was it called? I don't know the terms, but they did that hearing or something where they were talking with the judges,
Oral
were taught
argument.
oral
oral
arguments,
arguments.
and they
Yeah.
asked some questions that were definitely getting at the judges being concerned about privacy rules and about being, flying underneath the fence line or treetops in your yard, and they were hinting at some of that as being concerns of theirs, but
Right.
that didn't really show up in the final rule as much.
Not as much, no.
And from what we
But
understand, at
go ahead.
41 pages, I looked at a 41-page decision as, wow, this is really long. And
Mhm.
apparently it's not. Apparently it's very short. And there's an implication that the door is open for future litigation. So that, as well as the reinforcement of preemption, were the, looking for a positive out of this. Those were two positives that we took away from this.
Yeah, and I think, and one of the things we've always said is that there are different approaches to accomplish, a goal. And for us, as an organization, the FPVFC, we've chosen to work uh, from within, essentially, collaborate with the FAA, ensure that the rules that they do bring about are attainable, are do not restrict the hobby. And easy to comply with. Don't create a barrier for entry for newcomers, etc. And we worked very diligently on the remote ID response from the NPRM. Dave has done amazing things with the Joint Advisory Committee and the AC, both the same thing, just different names. And both Dan and Dave, actually, I should say Alex and Dave did Joint Advisory Committee and AC. And then Dave and Dan have participated in the
ARC.
ARC, the BVLOS ARC.
So many darn
I swear
acronyms.
it's crazy.
Alphabet
But
soup.
yeah, it really is alphabet soup. So, we've chosen to go that route. I think we've made some positive changes. and that's not to say RDQ wasn't uh, wasn't doing it for the better of the community. I just think two different approaches.
Or that we
Um,
agree with everything the FAA does. We give them
no,
advice
absolutely
and
not.
they definitely don't take it all. But
For anybody who knows me, I get on my soapbox at least once a month on these meetings and talk about the FAA. And it's there's some positives and there's some negatives, and just like anything in life, nobody gets it right. So I think that having being part of the input is a solution in and of itself, to ensure that we're not just boxed out of the hobby, because there are other interests out there who want access to the national airspace, but at the same time, we as hobbyists deserve that as well. So especially for one of the hobbies with the greatest safety record, and the safest form of aviation, and one of the in my mind the best examples of STEM programming. Period. So, it's just we want to protect the hobby, and RDQ wants to protect the hobby as well. Just tend to take a different tack on it, and um, but it is what it is. So there is room in there for future litigation, I should say, and that came in the form of um, some examples that RDQ gave, but hasn't happened yet, like the potential to abuse remote ID, for
or
officials to abuse remote ID,
didn't they
obviously
mention
without.
something
Go
else
ahead.
like if a pilot got attacked because of the remote ID information? Was
Yeah,
that one of the
Yeah.
examples?
They
yeah,
said
and
that's
so
not a reason to change the rule of pilot safety. Isn't a reason to change the rule. Is basically what they said.
right. So, one of the concerns is if that does happen, then that creates a potential form of future litigation. So, that door is still open. And one of the biggest things we are concerned with, and I know a lot of people in the community are concerned with, is that privacy, that ability to fly without somebody trying to who doesn't agree with your drone, and there's thousands upon thousands of examples on this. You just need to read through Facebook a couple of times, but people who don't agree with you flying your drone, who think you're spying on them, who think you're doing this or that or the other, to assault a pilot or steal your expensive gear or shoot your drone out of the sky or any number of other violent things that can happen, and that have happened in the past. Um, so it creates that potential. So one of the things we've talked about a lot with the FAA is that issue, that concern that things remote ID could lead to things like this happening when the public has access to that information. So we'll see what happens. God, I hope and pray that nothing ever bad happens to anybody as a result of this, but there are some concerns. So we'll see what happens, and that challenge is still out there. And anything I missed?
The only other thing I have would be to ask everybody watching if they've got any remote ID questions or questions about the lawsuit that we could answer, or if we can't answer, we'll try to find the answers for them.
Exactly.
I know there was a lot of chat going on in Joshua Bardwell's live stream talking about remote ID, and a lot of people had a lot of questions. And I'm pretty sure Joshua Bardwell also mentioned he's working on a video to hopefully come out soon with clarification on what he currently understands about remote ID.
Yep.
And I think he was getting some of
And
those details from us.
that's great, and we're happy to provide those. I know that Dave and I will be on some streams and some shows, and we'll have video clarifying some of this as well. So if you have a question about remote ID, let us know. Jump in here into Discord, hit one of us up, or send us an email. Our contact emails are on our website. Just let us know what your question is so that we can make sure and get that answered for you. It's fast approaching, and whether you're an organization, a company who's looking to do standard remote ID to be compliant by next month, or you're an end user, a pilot who just wants to make sure they're doing the right thing to not get in trouble, we're happy to help.
And who knows, maybe there's somebody out there who has some other interpretations of the rules and are seeing things that we're not seeing, and that the FAA should clarify. And if enough people point things out, the FAA probably will feel like they have to clarify some of that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So, all right. Well, with that, thank you, everybody. Do appreciate it. And we'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, see you guys in 2 weeks.
Yep.
Oh man,
Thank
I
you very much.
joined at just the end.
Yeah, you got the last minute, if that.
No, I didn't even realize it was going on tonight. I completely
You're good,
forgot.
man.
All
You're
right, I'll
totally
be here
good.
in the 2 weeks.
All right,
sounds good,
thanks.
Zipper.
Thank
Bye.
you.
All right, bye.